Perfect. Well, we can start a little bit early and get a little bit of additional insight from Robbie and co-authors. Welcome everybody to our 201st Wedding Online Sports Economics Seminar. It's a great pleasure to have Robbie Butler presenting to us. Objective calls under the spotlight, referee consistency and behaviour on football's biggest stage. Before we go, I should say that we are, of course, hosted by the University of Reading and sponsored generously by the Sports Economics Review, which you can see to my, you might be able to see to my, whichever side it is, on the screen. And do consider the Sports Economics Review for your manuscripts. Robbie has an hour, so to speak, and there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. Robbie, are you happy to take questions as you go along, or would you rather park them for the end?
If there's points of clarity that are required, just jump in. You might feel that, James, will you? If somebody has a question, you can just stop me and they can come in. There's no problem.
Sure.
I'll do my best to answer it.
Perfect. Well, in which case, the floor is yours, Robbie.
Great. So thanks, James, for the opportunity again. It's my third Reading online talk. So thanks. It's great to be able to do it again. And thanks to everybody for coming on a Friday afternoon. We got a bit of additional time there. You said so. This paper is about additional time. So hopefully I can illuminate or shed some light on what we're trying to do about additional time. It's something that's sort of well researched at this stage. Many people will be aware of that. There's lots of papers on additional time, and we're trying to add to this literature because basically we're trying to look at how an individual, in this case a referee, is trying to make a decision. And the setting is comparatively well defined because there's a rule structure there, as we all know from watching or playing football. And I'll talk to you about the rule of additional time in a minute. So, as I said, there's lots of stuff that's been done in this area, and that list is not exhaustive. There's many other papers that I could have added that are really good. So what we're trying to do a little bit differently is we're trying to look at within match contests. So we're comparing the first half with the second half, right? Because lots of studies have looked at home bias, or they've looked at just the second half, or they've looked at big club bias. Whereas we're trying to take this a little step further to say, well, the first half and the second half, are they different, right? And if they're different, can we explain why there's a difference? Because it's the same match, the same players basically, and the same referee. So just to give you a brief background of the laws of the game for people that aren't familiar, until 1891 there was no added time. There was a football league match between Stoke and Aston Villa. The game was about to end. Aston Villa got a penalty. And the Stoke players, I think it was Aston Villa got the penalty, but the Stoke players ran, got the ball, kicked it out of the stadium. There was only one football. Ball wasn't retrieved in time. The game ended, and the penalty was never taken. So there was two rule changes initiated. One was a game can now not end if a penalty has been taken. That's still there today, so it's essentially a last kick. And the second is that the referee could now add on added time at their discretion. And really importantly, it's entirely the referee's decision, and that remains the case today. It's not the fourth official who makes the decision. It's not the video assistant referee or anybody else. It's entirely down to the referee. It's covered by Law 7 of the game. So you can see there's the actual law. And it talks about natural stoppages where you're not supposed to add on time, and you're only supposed to make an allowance if the delay is excessive. And I suppose as football fans, we kind of have an appreciation for what that might be. And they actually go on to say then time allowed at the end of each half for lost time, essentially, because things like substitutions or injuries or yellow and red cards, goal celebrations, etc. But they never tell the referee how much time to add, because you'd often hear things in the media about, oh, you're supposed to add X amount of time for this, or Y amount of time for that. It's not that clear in the rules. So whilst the rule is quite formal, the direction is somewhat open to interpretation. Now, I would say, and I'll talk to you about this in a minute, an example. So here's a nice story from the former president of FIFA, an Englishman. He's a referee, Sir Stanley Rouse. He said when he was a referee before he became the president of FIFA, I would never give a penalty against Austria. That's all very well, but I would never give a penalty against Austria in Vienna during the last few minutes of a match and hope to get away safely. And we all kind of know what he means by that, because in the sense of the referee as an actor, they're essentially acting like an agent, and they're trying to maximize their utility and minimize their costs. And when he said that, as a football fans, we have an appreciation for what that means. And I suppose my interest in this originally would have come from the great Manchester United team and Sir Alex Ferguson, and this sort of belief that he got what was called Fergie time, and that referees would play extra additional time. So additional time beyond what they should have played because of certain pressure they might feel under, or because matches were going a particular way, or because the outcome wasn't what one might expect. Um, so this is our latest effort. That's a photograph from France '98, because this is when the Fourth Officials Board first appeared at the World Cup. It was a rule change. So since 1998, we've been seeing the official uh, go to the halfway line on the 45th minute and the 90th minute and hold up this board. That's probably first half, because it's only one. We don't know, but again, if you watch football, you generally tend to see differences in first and second half, and that's what we wanted to explore, because they happen in the same match. Some trivia here. Why does it matter? Um, People know what that's from. What goal it is? I'm sure you do. It's Liverpool losing the league title at home on the final day of the season to Arsenal. Michael Thomas scored the goal. That happened in added time. That's another famous one. It was a Bulgarian goal that prevented France from qualifying for the World Cup in 1994. And the fallout from this was huge, because Gerard Houllier, who was the manager of France at the time, essentially blamed David Ginola, who had been in an attacking position and lost possession. Ginola certainly never played under Houllier again. Whether he played for France again, I don't know, but he certainly never played under Houllier again, and France didn't qualify. So France would go from 1986 to 2002 without qualifying. They won it in 98, but they didn't have to qualify, because they failed to qualify in 1994 and didn't have to qualify in 98. That's another famous one. I'm sure Alex Farnell will enjoy that one. It's from 1999, where Manchester United turned the Champions League final around in additional time. So Teddy Sheringham in the 91st minute, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer then a couple of minutes later. And one he won't enjoy as much, I'm sorry, is obviously Aguero's goal in the final seconds. And again, there was two goals in added time there. Edin Dzeko scored to make it 2-2, and then Aguero won the Premier League title. I'm sure Rob will appreciate that. In added time, so it does really matter, because some of the things that happen in added time can have huge consequences. Should one expect a difference in the allocation of added time across halves? And I presented this to some children in schools around Cork, because you're trying to give them an appreciation for what we're trying to do, and whether there should be a difference. And of course, there may be a difference, and the difference mightn't be anything untoward. It may not be referee bias. It's just simply that different things are happening. Right. So here's a nice example from the World Cup, where we see Spain against Japan. It was a group game. Spain were expected to win quite comfortably. At half time, Aaron Morata had scored, and it was 1-0 to Spain. And there was 1 minute of additional time played in the game. It was actually 1 minute and 9 seconds was the total allocation. And this is what we observe in our data set, not what the fourth official holds up, but the actual amount. And that's really important, because sometimes there's a variation between what's held up and what's actually played, because things happen in additional time. And then there was quite a dramatic comeback from Japan, and they turned the game around, which was quite unexpected. They scored, and then we have kind of what became a sort of famous incident where they scored again, and the goal was disallowed, and it went to VAR, and VAR confirmed that even though the ball wasn't touching the line, the curvature of the sphere meant that the actual um, periphery of the ball, if you dropped a vertical line down, would be touching the line. So the goal was awarded. There was 7 minutes of added time played in that second half. Right now, on balance, you could look at that and think, oh, there's there's only 1 minute, when they're losing there's 7 minutes. But we can't say that because you don't know what's going on. And the VAR stoppage, he stopped the game for quite a considerable amount of time. And there could be other things. There could be injuries, there could be treatments, there could be substitutions, there could be yellow cards, red cards, and so on. So we're trying to explain the differences, and we're trying to see, well, what can't we explain, and what's left over is really what we're trying to interpret. There's the Champions League final. I just put this one in very recently. You're the first to see that. I've been watching the Champions League final, which was the European Cup final, since the mid 1980s. I've never seen a 5-0, and I've also never seen that. The referee blew the whistle, essentially on 90 minutes, right? And I thought, well, I have to use this example because if you are the type of person that thinks that's great refereeing, they're managing the game and the game is over. PSG have essentially demolished Inter Milan. What's the point in continuing? That's fine, but you're probably not going to agree with what we do or what we find or what we suggest, because I don't think that's the way the game should be refereed. There was lots of incidents in the second half, lots of goal celebrations, substitutions, yet there was no additional time. I understand why, right? But I suppose when I see that, it gives me cause for concern insofar as, well, the referee is managing the game in a certain way that's not necessarily applying the rules the way they should be applied. They're simply sort of, compensating, be it positive compensation or otherwise, to manage the game. But like I said, if you're of the opinion that that's really good refereeing, that's absolutely fine as well. So what might stop the game? So this is what we had to do, our data collection, and the data collection was essentially manual. And we do this for the World Cup in Qatar and Euro 2024. So, well, all the things that you think of. So there's the goals, there's the goal celebrations. Some of these were quite excessive. You might remember the World Cup in 2022. Some of the Brazilian celebrations in particular went on for quite a bit of time. Substitutions, something that happens regularly, particularly in the second half. You have cautions, you have red cards. There were actually very few in the World Cup in 2022. We have a nice difference here as well between what we call a treatment, where a player gets what we call a knock, and the medical staff have to come on, but then they continue playing. And what we call a serious injury. So we were able to distinguish between the two. And I think we're the first paper, or certainly one of the first, to be able to do that. Because one of the things that you'd often get asked is, there's more time in the second half just because the team that's winning, the players just go down more. They look for treatment more often. In fact, the data wouldn't stack that up. The number of treatments in the first half relative to the second half in both competitions is really similar. So it's not necessarily the case that a time-wasting tactic like, I'll pretend to be injured, is being used. And if players are trying to do that, well, the referees are not buying it, because they're not allowing them to get treatment. And in fact, the deeper in the competition you go, the less treatments you find. So if you find a quarterfinal or semi-final or even final where games can be very close or very intense, players continue to play. The number of times the medical staff are on the pitch is really, really small, but you're much more likely to see it in group games. And obviously we have VAR now, and VAR can stop the game, as we know, for a considerable amount of time, and comes in for quite a lot of criticism because of that. Because in some cases, VAR could stop the game for 3, 4, 5 minutes, depending on what the video assistant referee is trying to do. It might not be one incident, it might be 3 or 4 incidents in the same phase where they're looking at potential handball and a potential offside, or something like that. So myself and Dave took this a certain distance, and then Carol came on board and he was great, and Carol started to think about different hypotheses that we should test. So we have 4 different hypotheses I'll talk you through that we're testing. I don't present the full results now. I can share them with any if you want, simply because there's columns and rows and it would look so small on the screen that it would be quite lost, but I can share them. But what I'll do is I'll talk you through what we found generally. But I can share the paper with anybody immediately afterwards if required. So we're trying to see, is the referee acting in a sort of a manner that's applying the rules properly, because they have an optimal optimization problem. They want to stop the clock at a certain time. The choice is binary and it's irreversible. And sometimes people might argue, oh, the referee gets swept away in the game, so they're kind of enjoying the game, or they're enjoying the outcome, or they're not enjoying it, or they want to be seen to give teams another chance, particularly when the game is close. So we have several hypotheses. The first is that more additional time is played in the second half compared to the first, conditional on major events and stoppages. So it's just a pretty straightforward test. So we're just comparing second to first, and we have our controls like VAR and substitutions and yellow cards and red cards and goals celebrations and so on. The second hypothesis then is an extension of this, whereby major events and stoppages are associated with more added time played in the second half compared to when they occur in the first half. And I'll show you the model that we use to develop this in a minute, because we interact what's happening in the second half with our control variables. The third hypothesis just takes us on another step where we're looking at the scoreline and the margin. So this is bringing us back to the Champions League example, where because there was 5 goals between the team, there was no added time. Well, if that game was 1-0, would the referee have said there's no added time? So that's how we assess whether the scoreline is having an impact. And the last one then is whether the referee behaves differently based on what we call pre-match expectations of the outcome and the actual outcome as added time is allocated. So in the case of the World Cup, the biggest shock we had in any game was Saudi Arabia beating Argentina in the group stage. I think there was 13 minutes of added time played in the second half. So Saudi Arabia are leading by a goal. The pre-match odds on them winning was 18-1. Right? So the difference between what the expected outcome was, which was a clear Argentina win, and the actual outcome at the end of normal time was completely different. So do referees then behave differently based on who is winning? So we collect data, the World Cup in 2022, the Euros in 2024. Obviously, our sample size is small. There's nothing we can do about that. We've just over 250 observations in total. We get betting odds from Paddy Power. We get almost all of the kind of control variables from live score. That's where we get the difference between the treatment and the injuries. I collected the at a time data manually, so I had to watch every game. It was a useful and interesting research exercise where you were forced to watch every game in a major tournament. When games ended at the same time, there was a couple of times we were really close, but the last group stage, the games have to kick off together. So fortunately, we have 2 televisions in this house, and I managed to run from one to the other. They almost never ended at the same time. And where that did happen once, my 9-year-old jumped in and told me exactly how much time had been played. He also stepped in to help me once. Alex Farnell might remember this. I presented in minutes in the winter of 22 when the Qatar World Cup was on, and I missed the group stage games involving Uruguay, Ghana, South Korea, somebody else. But he acted as my research assistant and took the added time down for me. And anytime I had to check, there's a player here which shows the rerun of the matches that was used when it was necessary. We got the nationalities of the officials. So FIFA made that public in May 22 and UEFA made that public in April 24. So you can see different officials coming from different parts of the world. Obviously, for the World Cup, it's global. For the Euros, it was generally Europe, but not all. There was 5 referees that weren't from European nations. In fact, one made the headlines is an Argentinian referee who didn't referee after he had failed to award Scotland a penalty in a group game against Germany, I think it was, and it was quite controversial, and he wasn't seen again. So there's our empirical models and match them up to the hypothesis. We test the first hypothesis twice. The first model is sort of at the most basic level, where we're looking at the difference in at a time across halves. We control for competition, and we have our control variables, substitutions, yellow cards, red cards, treatment, serious injuries, goals, and VAR. The second model then takes that to its most strictest form, where we actually compare within match. So we're comparing the two observations from the same match. Whereas the first model is just comparing first half with second half. Our second hypothesis, then, we introduce our interactions. So we're now interacting our second half at a time observation with all our controls, to see if, what's going on. Is there something inherently different in how these events are treated in the second half compared to the first half? The third model then introduces the goal difference. So we look at absolute goal difference, and then we look at the difference in goals in the second half. And our final model then looks at these things and adds in the probability of the outcome, whether the actual outcome differs greatly from the expected outcome. So Carl has done brilliant work on this front. I know many of you worked with Carl, and you know how thorough he is on this. James can testify to that as well. And he's got into a level of detail that I didn't think was possible with this. So he's been absolutely fantastic. Just to show you, the final step that Carl has introduced is this decomposition technique, because what the last set of results I'm going to show you, and I'll show you these results, is to test whether there's differences essentially observed across the referees. So we're able to isolate where the referees are from, the confederation. We don't go into a country level to see, well, we can explain this amount of difference, but there's an unexplainable as well. And what's causing the unexplainable to happen, and is there differences then across confederations? So are European referees refereeing differently to South American referees, or referees from a different confederation within the FIFA family? So there's just some descriptives on a plot between first and second half. You can see, yeah, it's pretty obvious that almost always there's more added time played in the second half relative to the first. We have the World Cup on the left, we have the Euros on the right. So, again, it might just be the case there's more things happening. Substitutions generally happen in the second half. So, maybe that's what's driving this to be different, and it's nothing to necessarily be overly concerned with. That's it by referee. So again, if you look at the 29 referees for the World Cup and 19 for the Euros, again, there's more added time in the second half. And you can see not only more added time in the second half, more added time in the World Cup relative to the Euros. Now, the reason for that, of course, is Arsene Wenger came out prior to the World Cup and quite high profile started saying that he expects referees to add on the appropriate amount of added time. And I remember watching the early games of the World Cup and being shocked at the amount of added time. James and other English fans might recall the first half of England versus Iran, it was 14 minutes of added time. Now, a large part of that was due to the fact the Iran goalkeeper was injured. He got injured, he went down, he received medical treatment, he got up, tried to play on, and went down again. So the second time, there was obviously great cause for concern, because and it was a head injury as well. And it took quite some time for play to restart. But it was 14 minutes added on in the first half, which is essentially a period of extra time. I think it was 11 in the second half. So England's game in total was not far off a match that had extra time. Now, of course, the game was stopped for quite a substantial part. So here are some results. So what do we find? So when we test hypothesis 1, do they play more additional time in the second half? We can confirm they do, even for controlling for our controls. In fact, if you run it just on its own, they can play considerably more added time. They play about 3 minutes more in the second half. When we add in our controls, the amount of added time that they play, it declines, but we can explain it with our control variables. Not all of them. Certain things add on significantly more added time. Certain things are ignored. So we have lots of different sets of results, because we run this across all the competitions, across the World Cup and across the Euros. So I speak in generalities, and obviously we have the different models, but generally speaking, right, we're talking about 25 seconds for a treatment, about 25 seconds for a yellow card, about 30 seconds for a goal, and the other statistically significant variable is VAR, and VAR is about 90 seconds, right? But things like red cards and major injuries, and which we were very surprised at, and substitutions do not see significantly more added time played. The treatment one is interesting because it was highlighted to me at a talk in Liverpool, which David, I know David is on the call, kindly invited me over to do. They observed, well, that could actually be a worthwhile tactic. So if you're interested in wasting time, right, go down and look for treatment. Because if you watch football, if you look for treatment, it takes much longer than 25 seconds for the game to restart. So it would be value for money. So go down and waste a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, and the ref will add on some time, but he'll only add on 25 seconds. And that is something that is certainly open to further research. If people could get in play, and I know it is available, but if you get it in play data, but when the play stops and when it restarts, and run that, there's a visual. So this is controlling for various different effects, the difference between added time in the first half and the second half. Where it's negative, it's where there's a where first half actually outweighs second half. And that England-Iran game was one of the few observations. There's more World Cup observations, so that's why there's a longer tail there. And the World Cup added time is higher as well in games at the end. But yeah, generally they are doing that. When we look at our second hypothesis, major events and stoppages are associated with less added time in the second half relative to the first half. So when we interact our second half observations with the controls that we have, we actually find the referees don't add on as much time as they should. In fact, substitutions are a big one. They're actually significant and negative. Right? They add about a minute less than they should. And we're trying to explain that. Why is that the case? And the reason we think is because the majority of substitutions happen in the second half. And in most games, 9 to 10 substitutions were happening. So the observation is almost not changing, or it changes very little. Yet the allocation of added time changes a lot. And that's why we think that's happening. So it's actually significantly less than they might. The scoreline one is as we expected. The closer the game, the more time they play in the second half. So if a game is tied, or if there's only one a goal between them, the referee does seem to appear to be operating differently. They seem to be doing the opposite to what the Champions League final referee did, and he just called a halt to the game. And these results are robust across our different competitions. And we also estimate this as a Poisson as well, and we find the same effect. And the final result then, and I was both interested and surprised by this, we find no evidence that the referee is affected by the pre-match odds. So the suggestion that more time was added on because Argentina were losing to Saudi Arabia and because, the referee expected Messi to win, we didn't find that. These effects are not statistically significant, and that was across both competitions. So the referees don't seem to feel any pressure from a different team, or big team losing to a small team, or an unexpected result. Here's our decomposition, where we look at differences in the first and the second half. I can show you that one because it fits. The other ones are just, they look like that, but they're just much longer. The interesting result is the unexplained, and I just highlighted the red box. And we have it broken into categories where we have European, we have non-European, and then we have non-European, non-South American. So nearly 2 minutes is unexplained. But when we actually look at the composition of the referees, we find that the European referees appear to be better at doing this, or they certainly don't appear to be doing something significantly different. Whereas when we remove the European referees, there's about a minute and 20 seconds, 25 seconds that's unexplainable. And then when we take the South American referees out, we find this goes up to over 3 minutes, where we can't, well, at least we can't explain. Maybe there's something that we're missing from our model. And that's where you can help now. But we can't explain where that additional time is coming from. or additional time. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. So some expert thoughts. This is a famous quote. To be honest, it just gets to the point when adding on time should be taken out of the referee's hands. That's all I'm going to say. There were 2 stoppages of 2 minutes and 20 seconds and 5 substitutions. On top of that, they only played 3 minutes. And that's a great quote, because you might be thinking, well, who'd say that? A manager that wouldn't be very happy. That was Sir Alex Ferguson, probably the manager that's most synonymous with getting additional time. And even he wasn't happy with the amount of additional. That was a game against Aston Villa. I don't know what the outcome was, but I assume they didn't win because he wasn't happy. Vince Lombardi once said, "We don't lose, we just run out of time." And the famous United team were excellent at that. We're keeping going. We're essentially they would just run out of time. And the other one then is, I'm not happy with the way things are going at the moment. I'd like it if we were given strict guidelines on how they calculate the time remaining. Nobody knows how it's calculated. There's always a question mark at the end of the game. How long will it play? The rules should be explained better. That one is a little bit older now, because the person that said that is now in charge of the rules. That was Arsene Wenger. So he should help us. He now manages the rules. So tell us, how are they doing? Explain it better. You mean we've talked about this before. I'm happy to talk about now about how you might change this, like taking it out of the referee's hands, giving it to a timekeeper. In some sports, like rugby, for example, once you get to the 80th minute, the game is dead the next time the ball goes out of play. They've introduced that in Gaelic football here in Ireland now, where the added time this season has been taken out of the referee's hands. They do stop the clock, of course, but when the game gets to 70, the clock goes red, a hooter goes, and then it's essentially when the ball goes dead. So thank you very much. They are my thoughts. I'll stop sharing now if that's okay, and happy to chat and talk and provide clarity if I can. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Robbie. That was really, really interesting. I am going to give you a team round of applause. And we've got loads of time for questions and comments. So if anyone does have any questions or comments.
Thanks, Alex. So my children are gone for a haircut. They were sent for haircuts 2 minutes before they started. So the additional time here is dependent on when they come back.
Alex.
So no, not something important. It's a very nice talk. Just you may want to add for your motivation that a few years ago there was a group stage where Benfica and Paris Saint-Germain played together, and they played with my favorite team, Maccabi Haifa, and both of them beat Maccabi Haifa with high score. But PSG, they got less added time. And Benfica, actually, in the last game, they scored the decisive goal in the last minute, or in the stoppage time. And Benfica got really more injury time, more added time. And PSG, actually, this goal was missing for them, and they finished second in the group.
Okay.
So they really complained about why did you, because they won, I think, 7-2 against Maccabi Haifa, and then the referee almost didn't add anything. But Benfica was leading 5-1, and it was really crucial for them, and they scored the 6th goal.
I must check that out, because that's really because if the games had been the other way around, the opposite probably would have happened. So it was the sequence of the games rather than
absolutely.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that, Alex. I check it out.
Yeah. But usually Maccabi Haifa are much better than losing 7-2.
Okay. Well, you got to the group stage, so that's that's an achievement.
Thanks, Alex. Other questions and comments? Reade.
Yes, thank you. Very, very interesting, this referee analysis. I just got a small question on this second model that you proposed, where you have 2 equations, one for the first half and one for the second half. Do you take the dependence between these observations into account?
Which model is it? Sorry, again, just so.
If I remember correctly, it was the second model that you mentioned, where you have one equation for extra time, added time in the first half, one equation for added time in the second half, and I would expect some dependence between these observations, but not between matches.
So
So
if I'm interpreting you rightly, it was the first hypothesis. So we
yes,
have
yes,
we
yes.
run the model twice. So just if my interpretation of this is correct, because Carl was the genius behind the econometrics, the first model is simply comparing the observations from the first half with the observations from the second half, right? Not necessarily the same match. The second model looks at it at the same match, at a match level. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and I'm going to read I think there was a link to a paper, right? ISA paper. Is that in the email?
Yeah,
You
I've
know,
got
I
the
will
full
get back to
paper.
you.
I can send you the full paper as well, Ruben.
Yes, please do.
Absolutely, yeah. I can send it to you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Reade. Other questions and comments? Raphael.
Hi, Robbie. Can you
Hey,
hear me?
Raphael, how are you?
Hi. Good, thanks. Nice talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, maybe I missed it, but you're controlling for the number of events that are happening, right? So number of
Yeah,
substitutions and
yeah.
celebrations, but do you also control for the actual length of those events as well?
No,
So
so
the
we
length of the
don't.
goal celebrations.
No,
And okay.
that's a good question. If we could, like, that would be a huge improvement on the data set. You're dead right. Of course, you know, a Brazil celebration could have lasted 40, 45 seconds, whereas if another team scored, let's suppose it's a goal to get them back into the game, they could run and get the ball and bring it back. The game could start really quickly. And you're completely right. That's a limitation of our data. I didn't have the appetite to, you know, to sit down and actually with a stopwatch to do that. But I think that's the next step in this research. Maybe if someone could do that, you would actually start to explain some of the unexplainable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I could,
no,
yeah.
you're
So,
dead right.
yeah.
We treat them as homogenous, and clearly they're not always homogenous.
Yeah, I was thinking so if you're comparing like first and second half, I could also imagine that even within the same game, the same events might take longer in the second half than in the first half, for instance.
So that's a good question, and it's something that was posed to us before. From observing the games, particularly the World Cup, and if you take a goal, I suppose a goal in a World Cup is the highlight of many people's careers, right? And even goals scored in the first half were really celebrated, right? The teams were so happy. Um, but I do accept if someone were to score in the final minutes of a game that was really important, yeah, it could go on for longer. The substitutions didn't seem to be any different first to second half. The treatment certainly didn't appear to be any different. The VAR was no different, at least anecdotally, first to second half. So it's a valid point, but I suppose it's not something we were overly concerned with. If we had perfect data, of course we could, but I'm sorry, I'm afraid we don't.
Thanks, Raphael. More questions and comments? Alex.
Thanks,
I hope
Robbie.
you were pleased. I hope you're pleased with that photograph I put in for you. So.
Oh yeah, well, one of them, yeah.
The other one was for Rob.
Yeah, no, thanks. Very, very interesting. Yeah, I could have missed this. Do you have whether it's a group stage or a knockout game?
Yeah, we
as a
control
You
for
do control that.
for the round. Yeah,
Okay.
we do. Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
comment. But I suppose again though, do you know? I suppose when you're watching these competitions, the games are almost all equally important. Almost. Of course, you could be out in the group, and the third game might be as important. But almost all of these games they're nearly knockout.
Mm-hmm.
Like particularly if you draw your first game. I was actually reading Hugo Lloris's book recently. Dave obviously gave it to me as a Spurs fan, so I had to read it. And he made a good point. He said if you draw your first group game in a competition, your second game is almost a knockout.
Kind of must win, yeah. Yeah.
Almost, you know. So they were sort of high intensity, high stakes. I suppose that's one of the benefits, even though the sample size is small. One of the benefits of looking at the Euros and the World Cup, all of these games are really important. They all really matter. The other thing is they're neutral as well. That was a very important. Well, almost all neutral. Of course, you have Qatar in there, but the Euros was you know, Germany are obviously a problem, but all the other teams, it's been expanded tournament. Most of the games are neutral, so you don't have a referee under pressure from a home crowd or something like that necessarily.
I was thinking about the knockout stage question from a slightly different perspective, Robbie, which was there's going to be extra time if the game finishes level, and whether the referee somehow bears that in mind and wants to knock off early, and so he gives the teams a bit more chance to get a goal before the end, and so therefore whether when extra time is a possibility, there's a difference in the amount of extra time awarded.
So that's a nice observation, and I completely understand that point. I think there's also the chance that if extra time is there, the ref, and this is just speaking anecdotally, the ref might blow it sooner, just because you finish the game out and think, you know what, you can have extra time to decide it, rather than playing more. And if it's decided in that kind of short window, do they then feel somewhat responsible for the outcome? It's interesting you say that, James. We had some extra time observations, but we dropped them because it was just different. It was different. So it's obviously just 15 minutes, and very little might happen in those 15 minutes. But you could still get 2 or 3 minutes. Another thing we'd observe anecdotally, and again, this is speaking as a football fan, and maybe people here can appreciate this, is that when the amount of added time was held up, so let's suppose it was 4 minutes, right? Clearly, we could do what Raphael suggested and go through the 45 minutes. And I guarantee you could identify more than 4 minutes of stoppages, right? You could say, look, that's too little, but people kind of accept it's 4 minutes. We'll play 4 minutes, right? They discount it. 4 is fine. But when you get into added time, that 4 minutes also almost becomes sacrosanct. You have to play the 4. So if there's a stoppage in added time, the referee will add on almost the correct amount to make up. So it's almost like the time that they added on, despite the fact it's only a proxy, once that's locked in, they will actually play all of it, even if the game stops. And in some cases, they may play even beyond it. Because I suppose they don't want to be seen to be somehow influencing the outcome, or at least to be seen to be giving every opportunity to a team that needs to score or is trying to score. Again, observing football as we watch it, the referee could blow the whistle at any point, particularly once the amount of added time that they've allocated is surpassed. But they don't. If a team is attacking or is a corner, and we always get upset as football fans if they seem to blow the whistle at what's called an inappropriate time. It's almost like the ball has to be cleared. Or the team that's winning has to break away and go on an attack, and then they'll blow it. So I guess, look, that's just as a football fan. There's no science behind that. It's just me kind of. It's like Alex Crummer saying there, about Benfica and McAfee and that.
Yeah,
and I guess that's just how the game. That's how the ref manages the game, isn't it? And in the same way, the ref blew the Champions League final at 90 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. The other things related to that, I guess, essentially are you've probably not got many extra time observations to run your models on the amount of time given in extra time, which also is potentially quite interesting. The proportionality is quite something. So, the game behind me, 2 observations from it. One, the referee was obviously exhausted because he came off. He was replaced after 116 minutes, 108 minutes. So obviously when he was kind of thinking about added time, he was genuinely thinking, I'm not sure I can
Was there a
do extra
substitution
time.
for the ref? Was there a substitution for the referee?
Referee was substituted.
I hope that was added on.
Well, we didn't care. What kind of relate to the point is that happened just before we scored 2 goals in the second half of extra time.
Sure.
And the referee had added 4 minutes to the second half of extra time,
wow.
Which, we were winning, so therefore I wanted less than 4 minutes, but also 4 minutes proportionally.
Yeah.
4 minutes added on in 15 minutes versus 4 minutes in 45 minutes. It's quite a big difference.
Yeah. I agree with you. It's almost like the deeper in the game you go, particularly into extra time, the more pressure they almost feel to be seen to be allocating the time correctly. Because if you apply that to a normal match, you're talking 15 minutes at the end of or
Yeah.
12, 15 minutes at the end of normal time. Yeah, so I mean, I suppose it's something that's of interest, and I guess it's a more scientific approach to say maybe the approach that's there. And paradoxically, I wouldn't be a fan of VAR. I think that's overly scientific in terms of lines drawn against an elbow and a toe. I'd be much more willing to let offside be more judgment. But yet I prefer this not to be. So that's sort of somewhat of a contradiction. I can't explain that. And others then would be very in favour of VAR, saying, you draw a line, and if they're ahead, they're ahead. But yet we'd rather the ref can manage the game. And, if the outcome is known essentially at full time, if it's 5-0 to a team, is there really any point in continuing this on? But as our Champions League example proves, maybe there is a reason, because these goals can be really important.
Just something else. I mean, there's still lots of time for the questions, but you mentioned that you're using the actual amount of time rather than what was awarded.
Yeah.
Have you run the regressions on both just to get a sense of whether you get similar results?
No, we haven't. In most cases, they're almost identical. So if a minute goes up, it's a minute 1, a minute and 2. But in some cases, it's not. It could go 20, 30, 40 seconds above. And in some cases, they're miles apart, because the ref says 2 minutes and then a player gets injured in the 2 minutes and he ends up playing 8. So that observation is essentially meaningless. So that's why we didn't run it on the board. That's why we actually needed the amount of added time. The only time, or the only observation that we control for when the board goes up is the margin, because the number of goals between the teams is important in that moment.
Yeah.
Because they're making a decision based on that, and any decision to extend it after that shouldn't be because of the margin changing.
I mean, there is something interesting there, though, isn't it? In the sense that you've had this new kind of information since I didn't realize it was 1998. It's been that long that they've been doing it for.
Yeah.
But you now have that concrete bit of information that's based on what happened in the previous 45 minutes. And then what happens in those next 4, 5, 6 minutes, whatever it is, that's back to the discretion of the referee.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it was pre-1998 again. And I wonder whether there's something different about those events that happen in injury time, in first half injury time relative to second half injury time. Because, of course, even if you don't give quite the full amount for an injury in first half injury time, there's still a second half when things can be sorted out. But second half injury time, if you don't add the right amount of time,
that's
then
it.
That's it. It's
absolutely
all over.
Yeah, and that's in the paper. The first half decision doesn't really matter, because the ref can always say, look, you have the second half, and I suppose we all treat, even though the halves are identical, we treat them differently mentally as much as anything, because the first half is, things can change, whereas the second half is final. And once that final whistle goes, it is by name final, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, I've helped things for long enough. Does anyone else have any questions and comments they want to put to Robbie? Oh, just at the last, in injury time, Rob.
Yeah,
Julia as well. So Julia's first, actually. So according to they're both identical, but Julia is listed first. So Julia, go ahead.
Oh, go on, Julia.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me, guys. So I'm curious whether there's a referee that starts awarding or tolerating more time. So as a series of matches progresses, right? Assume that everyone kind of agrees that +2 is the standard and they more or less adhere to that standard. And then you have one referee in the group who exceeds this margin by a significant amount, whether he keeps pulling up the group as the cups progress. Do you have any results on that by any chance?
So generally, we do have it across referees, and generally the distribution is random. That there is no referee that is seen as a ref that adds more time or plays longer. The same referee could be observed to be adding on 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. It's not necessarily the case that you'd have a guy, he's known to play longer, or she's known to play longer. No, it's not like that. As I said to you, the difference we do find is across nationalities, whereas the non-European referees, particularly non-European, non-South American, tend to be adding on more time. But at an actual referee level, we don't observe that. That makes sense.
No, it's reassuring for your results, I'd say, rather than anything else.
I think if there was a referee like that, they would quickly get a reputation for it, and they'd either be sort of pressurized not to do it, or they would they'd lose credibility. Yeah, that's probably what would happen. Yeah, that's a good question though, because it's something I hadn't really thought about.
Thanks, Julia, and then Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. This is a sort of question that's impossible to answer, I suppose. It's rather speculative, but I'm just wondering what the audience response is to all of this. So, even right now, the Women's Euros, we've got several games with large amounts of time added on, both in first half and second. So well above 10 minutes in some of the games, the sort of thing that you've been highlighting. Is that really good for the viewers? I suspect not. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. This added time seems to be increasing. And also at the same time, in domestic leagues, we've got Sky Sports and TNT Sports admitting that their viewership figures have gone down over the last season. So it might be a spurious connection, but I wonder what you think about that.
Again, that's another good question, Rob. And there's also the player welfare issue, because you got a lot of players have spoken out about this, particularly in the Euros and the World Cup. The workload is obviously an issue, with things like the Club World Cup, and they're also talking about the length of matches, because matches now go to 100, 105, 110 minutes, maybe more in some cases. And the observation about TV is really interesting as well, Rob, because I know the broadcasters actually had an issue with this. They don't want long periods of added time because they have obviously commercial breaks to take, and they have a certain window where this match has to fit in. And VR has created that dynamic where you take a Premier League match on a Sunday. Those games, they'd start at 4. They would normally be over before 6 o'clock. Now those games can run till 6:20. So the length of the game is extending, and I don't know if that's a good thing for the product. And maybe that's why the consumption figures are down. I would have spoke to you about this as well. I would have blogged about it. I think VAR has done, huge amount to consumption and what we consume. I don't think it's the same product as it was. Alex, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, well, one comment. If I remember correctly, during the World Cup, this Italian guy who was the head of the FIFA referee
Collini, was
committee,
it? Collini,
yeah, he explicitly asked to have more added time. So there was kind of a strategic decision to have more added time. And in that regard, I'm not sure that FIFA are not happy about it, because then the sponsors are exposed for more time. So maybe the fans don't like it, but the FIFA, so the demand are not okay with that, but the supply is very happy.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree. Rob?
Thanks, Doug. Reade's next.
Yes, I think follow up on that remark that the unpredictability of the duration matters to the television people, not so much the duration by itself.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it would be interesting if you can get hold of advertising viewers after the first half and after the second half, and see if there's any material difference there.
That can be the next paper.
Any more questions and comments?
Thanks again, James, for the opportunity to present. It's always a pleasure. And thank you, actually invited me to do this one, so really, really grateful for that.
Well, I saw an interesting paper, which is what I often do, and it happened to be yours. I knew Carl wouldn't want to present, so thank you, Robbie. It was really,
thank you.
really,
Thanks
really
for
everybody
for showing up as well. Patrick, Charles, David, Julia there as well, Kenneth. So I really appreciate it. And so we'll wrap up there. Thanks, Robbie. Thanks everyone for taking part. We've now got a couple of weeks break before we meet again, which will be on the 1st of August.
Sartak Mondal from the University of Portsmouth, presenting The Illusion of Choice, a critical examination of competitive balance measures. So wish you all a fantastic weekend wherever you are, and however distant that is for you, and see you all soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
Cheers, Robbie.
Thanks, Robbie.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.